Okay, hello and welcome to our next lesson in this topic on adaptation and competition. So last lesson we started having a look at what variation was. We spoke about the differences between environmental and genetic variation. Today we need to start having a look at continuous and discontinuous variation. So by the end of the lesson you should be able to define what variation is, you should be able to explain the differences between continuous and discontinuous variation, and you should be able to represent variation within a species using a graph. So if we can start by refreshing our screen because it seems to have gone black at the top for some reason. However, it doesn't seem to be changing, so we'll just use the screen as it is. Last lesson we spoke about variation, okay? And variation is a really key term. It's a big key word that is used not only in year 8 but at GCSE, and even after GCSE it's used at A level. So variation is defined as the differences in characteristics between organisms of the same species. Okay, between organisms of the same species. We've said that variation can be either genetic, which can also be known as inherited, or environmental. Now today we need to look at how variation can also be split into what's known as continuous and discontinuous. This number refers more so to the numerical value of the variation. So we can say underneath here, and I'm going to put it in red because it's important, we can say that the data collected about variation can either be continuous or discontinuous. Now, it's important to point out that these words, continuous and discontinuous, you may have heard of them in maths. In maths, you may have worked with continuous data or discontinuous data. The same rules apply to science. If you've done this in maths already, you're going to do exactly the same in science. So I'm just going to add some arrows here, and I'm going to say may have covered this in maths. Now, in science, we're talking specifically about variation. We're talking about these differences between organisms of the same species. So if I just quickly pull up an image that we used in the last lesson, if I can quickly find it, it's here somewhere because I've done a lot of lessons since then. We used this image, okay, and we had a picture of a boy and a girl, and we said that although they're the same species, there's lots of variation here. We've got the girl might be very intelligent, more intelligent than the boy anyway. She speaks English, whereas the boy speaks Italian. The girl is a good tennis player, whereas the boy is good at riding horses. The girl is short, whereas the boy is tall. And the boy has the blood group AB. Now, while there is all these types of variation found between the boy and the girl, some of this variation would be continuous and some of it would be classified as discontinuous. And today we're going to look at the differences between those two, and we're going to say how we can plot those on a graph. So, if we refresh our screen, set it back to black, put the pen back on. So, the first one I want to look at is discontinuous variation. So discontinuous variation. Now, discontinuous variation can be defined as characteristics that can only result in certain values. So characteristics that can only result in certain values. Some examples of discontinuous variation. So e.g., and that's like the worst arrow ever drawn in mankind. E.g., we could say gender. You're either a boy or you're a girl. We could say eye colour. You either have blue, brown, green, hazel eyes. So eye colour. We could say skin colour. These are all examples of discontinuous variation. Okay? So we'll just add underneath here that with gender, I'm going to put it in red, with gender, comma, you are either a boy or a girl. So this data can be put into groups. Can be put into groups. If I was to look at the data from our class, I might say that out of 30 pupils, 16 are girls and 14 are boys. I can put them into those two groups. I could split our class up into boys and girls. I could also split our class up into people with blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, hazel eyes. Okay? I could split people up into white skin, black skin, brown skin, and so on and so forth. So all these are examples of discontinuous data. Now, when we draw discontinuous data as a graph, we always use a bar chart. Okay? So I have prepared some images, as I have been doing for the previous few lessons. On the screen at the moment is a graph showing blood groups. Okay, now you can either be blood group A, blood group B, blood group AB, or blood group O. Therefore, we can put all the people in the country into these groups, and we can then draw a bar chart to show the percentage of the population with those blood groups. So the most common one is blood group O, closely followed in second place by blood group A. Blood group B, only about 10% of the population, and then 5% of the population is AB. So we can say that when we put discontinuous data or variation, data slash variation onto a graph comma, we always use a bar chart. Okay? When we do the bar chart, the groups go on the x-axis and the number go on the y-axis. So we can put groups on the x-axis and the number in each group, number in each group on the y-axis, which is up the side. Okay? So when we look at discontinuous variation, these are characteristics that can only result in certain values. We can always put discontinuous variation into groups. So such as gender, either male or female, eye colour, blue, green, brown, skin colour, white, brown, black. With gender, you're either a boy or a girl, so this data can be put into groups. Blood group is another example, because blood group, you're either group A, B, AB or O. When we plot discontinuous data on a graph, we always use a bar chart. We always put the groups on the x-axis and we put the numbers in each group on the y-axis. Okay? So, that's discontinuous data. Let's have a look at continuous data now. As I says, you've probably covered this or something similar in maths. If you haven't, you will do at some point, and it's exactly the same rules. So, continuous variation can be defined as a characteristic that can take any value within a set range, can take any value in a set range. Now, examples of continuous variation. So, e.g., that arrow is much better this time. E.g., we could say height. We could say weight. We could say foot size. We could say hand size. These are all examples of continuous variation. Now, height is an example of continuous variation because there will always be a tallest person, there will always be a shortest person, so we will always have somebody who is tall in the room, so our class will always have a tall person. We will always have a shorter person in the room, and then the range will be, so we've got the tallest, we've got the smallest, and we will always have a set range of heights between those, and people can be found anywhere in the middle. So everyone else is in the middle. Okay? So we can say that, and I'm going to put this in red because it's important, that the height and I've gone blank how to spell height, height of a population will always range between the shortest and the tallest. Between the shortest and tallest person. Now, when we're talking about height, people often say, well, couldn't you just group everybody who's 5'1", everybody who's 5'2", everybody who's 5'3", which yes, of course you could. But imagine if we were to do it as millimetres. There would be some people who are 100 millimetres, some people who are 101, 102, 103, and you would only have one or two people in each group. Therefore, it's easier to say that this is continuous variation. So I am going to add up here in red while I've got the red pen out by saying continuous, that's the worst U ever, continuous variation cannot be put into groups. Okay, so it's data that cannot be put into groups. When we plot continuous data on a graph, we always use what's known as a histogram. Okay, a histogram. And the reason I've been talking about heights is because I've got the perfect graph here that shows the heights of a population. Now, a histogram tells us the number of people within a set range. So according to this graph, the shortest people start at 130 centimetres. That's our smallest. And our tallest end at 174, because there's nobody in this value here. So this person here would be, for example, the person who's the smallest would be 130, and the tallest would be 174. Everybody else is found within the middle, because we're going from the smallest to the tallest. So we can say, in fact we used this colour last time, didn't we? Continuous variation is always plotted on a histogram. Okay, we have along the x-axis the grouping of certain values. So for example, these have gone up in fours, so from 130 to 134, from 135 to 139, from 140 to 144. So we have grouping of ranged values on the x-axis, and up the side we have the number of organisms on the y-axis. So number of organisms, or frequency, on the y-axis. Now what you'll find with continuous variation is that you always get this shape graph. If we add a line to the continuous variation graph, we get what's known as a normal distribution. It forms what's known as a bell curve. So, final couple of things we need to write down. In red, because it's important, I'm just going to say a line is added to the graph to see its shape. See its shape better. And this shape is known as a normal distribution, or it can be known as a bell curve. So I need to pick a good colour that we can use that you'll be able to see. We'll go orange. So this is known as a normal distribution. And what we mean by that is that the graph goes low, high, and then back down low. It can also be known as a bell curve because it sort of has the shape of a dinner bell. So continuous variation is a characteristic that can take any value in a set range. For example, height, weight, foot size, hand size, and you'll always find that you'll get this shape of any of those variations. The height of a population will always range between the shortest and the tallest person. So for example, if the smallest is 130 and the tallest is 174, if we plot that on a histogram, we'll get this normal distribution or bell curve. We always plot continuous variation on a histogram. So we put the number of people in a set value, so the frequency, in a set range. So there's this many people who have the height between 130 and 134 centimetres. There's this many people with 135 to 139. There's this many people with 150 and 154. We would say that this middle one is the average. This is the middle value, okay? So the average or middle value will always have the biggest bar, okay? It will always be the highest. So, couple sets of questions for you to do now. The first one I want you to do, I'm putting on the screen as we speak, so I'm going to reset this back to black. And we're going to add our questions in that I want you to have a go at first. We're going to do quite a few today. So for the first one, I want you to decide which is the best type of graph to use for each of these. So what I would like you to do, I would like you to pause the video, and I would then like you to write down in your books the question, and I would like you to write an answer to it, please. So pause the video now, make sure you got a different coloured pen, press play again when you're ready to start. Okay, so you should have had a think about which graphs best suit each of these scenarios. You should have a different coloured pen. I would like you to mark your work and correct it if you got it wrong. So members of your class who have lobed or lobeless ears, if you think about it, for this one, it can be put into groups. So lobeless or lobed ears can be put into groups. So can be put into groups. Therefore, it's discontinuous data. And therefore you would use a bar chart. Okay. For our next one, the length of feet of each of your teachers. So I've got fairly big feet, I'm a size 12. I would assume that my feet are much bigger than most teachers, so I would be near the top, and you would have teachers who are much shorter who are near the bottom. Everybody else's shoe size or everybody else's foot length in millimetres would range between those two. So this is continuous data. Continuous data. And therefore we would use a histogram. A histogram to plot their data. The height of a group of seedlings planted for a germination experiment. So again, these seedlings could be any height. I'm going to redo that line. Could be any height based on millimetres. So this would be continuous variation. Continuous data or variation, and therefore you would use a histogram. Finally, our last one, the number of strawberries per plant from a sample of 25 plants. Now, different plants would give off different numbers of strawberries, therefore this is continuous data. Continuous data. This is continuous because the strawberry plant that gives off the least strawberries may be 2, the one that gives off the most might be 100, and everybody else would range in the middle. Therefore you would use a histogram. So hopefully you got those right. If you didn't, you're more than welcome to email me or have a look online, see if you can find the answers yourself. Make sure that you're happy with that concept. What I would like you to do now is I would like you to have a go at the next question. I am going to have to do this in parts because we're going to need a graph for the second lot. So I would like you please to have a go at the questions that are on the board now. I would like you to write out the question, fill in the gaps as you go. So pause the video, make sure you got a different coloured pen so that you can mark and correct your work. Okay then, so you should have had a go at that video, those questions now. We need to mark our work, correct it with a different coloured pen if you got it wrong. So it should read, characteristics that only result in certain values show discontinuous variation. Characteristics that can have any value within a range show continuous variation. The range of values from a characteristic from a sample can be displayed using a graph. A characteristic such as eye colour should be displayed using a bar chart. Characteristics showing continuous variation such as body mass should be shown as a histogram. So it should read, characteristics that can only result in certain values show discontinuous variation. Characteristics that can have any value within a range show continuous variation. The range of values of a characteristic from a sample can be displayed using a graph. A characteristic such as eye colour should be displayed using a bar chart. Characteristics showing continuous variation, such as body mass, should be shown using a histogram. So you can pause the video if you haven't got that marked yet, but I need to put up the final set of questions for you, and we are going to need one of the graphs we used previously because it's referred to in one of the questions. So if I pull this up, put your questions on the board, so add image, we want the second set of questions, and I'm going to put those over here, and you're also going to need the following graph, the graph we used on heights, this one, and I'm going to put that here, and that box should disappear, so don't worry. So I would like you to pause the video now please. I would like you to have a go at question 2, write out the question, answer it in your book. Have a go at question 3. It says look at the graph of variation of heights on this page. It's this graph here. And then I would like you to have a go at question 4. Please make sure that you write out the question before answering it. When you're ready to mark it, get a different coloured pen and press play on the video again. So pause the video now please. Okay then, so you should have paused the video, you should have written out these questions and had a go at them. Let's us get this marked and then we're done for today. So for question 2, it says, classify each of these characteristics into continuous and discontinuous variation. So the continuous examples of variation from that list would include your length of arm, so length of arm. it would include your maximum sprinting speed. So maximum sprinting speed. And it would also include, finally, the average leaf size. Average leaf size. The reason these are all continuous variation is because the length of arm, you would have the shortest arm and the longest arm, and everybody else's would range in between. Sprinting speed, you would have the fastest person and the slowest person, and everybody else would range in between. And leaf size, you would have the biggest and the smallest, and everybody else would range in between. Therefore, the discontinuous pieces of variation in that list would include hair colour and shoe size. Hair colour and shoe size. Now, shoe size you may have put as continuous. Remember, foot length is measured in millimetres. Shoe size can be put into groups. So I mentioned earlier that I'm a size 12 foot. I could be put into a group with everybody else who's a size 12. And then there would be 12 different groups, but our foot sizes might be different. I may be a very small size 12, whereas somebody else may be a very big size 12. Okay? Question 3 says, look at the graph of the variation in heights on this page. Describe the pattern that the variation shows. So for 3A, what you needed to say is that most people have an average height of about 150. So 150 would be in the middle. So for 1 mark, we can say most people are 150 to 154 centimetres. Okay? There's few people who are very short, below 135. So few people are below 135 centimetres. And finally, there are also few people who are above 170. So few people above 170 centimetres. So for 3 marks, most people are in this 150 to 154 bracket. However, there's very few people who are lower than 135, and there's very few people who are above 170. Okay, we've got these extremes, but most people are in the average. 3B. So 3B says, explain whether this variation is a result of environmental factors, inherited factors, or both. So you needed to say that height is due to both genetic and environment for 1 mark. For your 2nd mark, you needed to say that you can have the genes from your parents to be tall. So height genes are inherited from parents. However, you need the food and nutrients to grow. So even if you have got the genes to be very, very tall, but you don't have much food, you're not going to grow. You're not going to increase your height because you're not getting the sufficient nutrients. So, but food from the environment is needed for us to grow. If you don't have that food, you won't grow, even if you've got the genes. So the final question says, number 4, it's a 6-mark question. Explain in detail the difference between continuous and discontinuous variation using examples of features from the human body. So, continuous variation for 1 mark. Continuous variation can take any value in a range. Okay, so continuous variation can take any value within a range. Examples of continuous variation for a 2nd mark would be height, weight, arm length. These are all examples that you could have had for continuous variation. You should have then said that continuous variation should be plotted on a histogram. So 1 mark saying continuous variation can take any value in a range. Examples include height, weight, arm length, foot length. Any of those would have given you a mark. And continuous variation should be plotted on a histogram. Discontinuous variation. So for your 4th mark, discontinuous keep spelling continuous wrong. Discontinuous variation can only result in certain values. Can only result in certain values. These include, so e.g., eye colour, blood type, skin colour. These are all examples of discontinuous data. And for your 6th mark, you needed to say that discontinuous data is plotted on a bar chart. So discontinuous data is plotted on a bar chart. So I have tried to squeeze quite a lot on this page. So for question 4, you should have said continuous variation can take any value within a range, such as height, weight, arm length, leg length, hand width, foot length. Any of those would have given you a mark. For your 3rd mark, you needed to say that continuous variation should be plotted on a histogram. For a 4th mark, you needed to say that discontinuous variation results in certain values. Examples of discontinuous variation are eye colour and blood group. You could have also had skin colour, hair colour, yes or no, whether you have scars. That could have also been an example. And then finally, discontinuous data should be plotted on a bar chart. So, you should now be able to tell me what variation is. You should be able to explain the difference between continuous and discontinuous variation, and you should be able to represent the variation on different types of graph. That concludes today's lesson on continuous and discontinuous variation. If you have any questions, please drop a comment in the Google Classrooms or send me an email directly and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Until next time, please stay safe. I will see you then.